Welcome to the big stories on the AM show, and especially as we contemplate Independence Day, the 68th, yesterday, as we contemplate a 24-hour economy and more, we contemplate this morning a crucial aspect of our economy. The maritime industry worldwide has seen some momentous changes in recent decades. In the last few years, the seismic events of COVID-19 and the Red Sea crisis have sent shockwaves down the spine of the industry globally. Here in Ghana, as recently as the 24th day of February 2025, port transport unions were protesting what they termed illegal fees and rampant delays at the Tema Port. How, we ask, is the Ghana Chamber of Shipping facing up to the core issues? Is it up to the challenge of ensuring that stakeholders in Ghana's maritime transport sector make the most of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, for example? These crucial questions and more will be answered by our guest, Mr. Stanley Rajakoshi Aholu, President of the Ghana Chamber of Shipping. Mr. Aholu, a very good morning to you, sir.
Very good morning, Benjamin.
Quick question. How did you get the Raja?
Well,
you didn't see that one coming, did you?
I didn't see that one coming, but I think, my father had a very good Indian friend who was a medical doctor in the Volta region.
Right.
And I think he decided to call me that too.
I have one too that I will not reveal now. I'll reveal it privately. But the doctor who delivered me was Sri Lankan, and he gave me.
Oh, okay. Give you.
It also starts with R.A.
Oh,
it's
I see. I see.
But it's my secret.
Oh, fantastic. We have something in common then.
We have something in common. Let's start from here as we talk about the maritime industry.
Yeah.
How old and how vibrant is the modern? I'm not referring to the modern maritime industry in Ghana.
The modern maritime industry in Ghana, how old and how vibrant? I think it's as old as our country.
Mm-hmm.
And it predates independence. I think what we have currently, which is an enhancement of a colonial system, in my humble view, basically concentration on ports, to take out raw materials or commodities, and then the same ports bringing in finished products, consumable products. And so the key thing in terms of the maritime sector for most of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is essentially ports. And I say that, the overemphasis on ports is a colonial,
a vestige of
colonial system. And that has continued. Of course, there has been improvements in infrastructure. Ports have modernized quite significantly. MPS terminal and our ports are one of the best in the region in terms of the facilities in the ports, the connectivity globally. I think we're doing very well there. But then again, the maritime transport value chain goes beyond ports. And so to focus on ports simply means that we are neglecting the other aspects of the value chain. And that has detrimental impacts on our economy. And we'll talk about that.
But is that what we're doing?
We are overemphasizing ports. Of course, we should emphasize on our ports, modernize them, enhance them, and make sure they are up to modern standards. We are doing exactly that. There's investment in our port systems. However, just focusing on that to the neglect of the other aspects of the maritime value chain, what that does is that we lose quite a lot of value that could have been derived from the rest of the value chain. And so then also we are importing maritime transport services. We are net importer of maritime transport services. So I'll give you a couple of statistics. I mean, this is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in terms of what they say in respect of how much money, and I think we need to put this in terms
We need to quantify it.
We need to quantify, then we can see the extent of the problem we have. So the UNCTAD stats show that we have, in terms of transport services exports, in other words, what's the component of transport services that we are exporting or providing that amounts to about 426 million US dollars.
Is it as a country or as a continent?
As a country.
As a country.
As a country. I'm talking about Ghana now as a country. Transport services imports. What we are importing in terms of services, transport services, amounts to $2,409 million.
So that's about 5-6 times more than what
we are actually
putting out.
And why is this important? It's important because we are a net importer of everything we consume. And so if we are spending our hard-earned currency importing goods and also exporting goods, and there's a trade deficit in terms of imports and exports. In terms of exports, we are not adding much value. We are just shipping out commodities, and I'll come to that as well. And if we're just basically importing everything we consume, 95% or so of our international trade or trade in merchandise that we bring in is carried by sea.
95%.
It's carried by sea. So you can see then that even though, so somebody buys a container load of bags, brings it into the country to sell, or any other item, finished product, brings it into the country.
I mean, you can talk about poultry products, you can
all
talk about food products, canned products, you can talk about even vehicles and all of that. Most of them are coming to the country by sea.
They're coming to the country by sea. Now, the freight component or the maritime transportation component of that is quite significant. So we have the goods coming in by ourselves, we are paying for it, but we're also paying for transport services to bring it in. When we could control that.
Whom are we paying for
We're
this?
paying foreigners.
Foreigners.
We're paying foreigners for it. In fact, we don't really have a local maritime transport system. We're dependent upon the transportation of our imports on multinational shipping lines.
So the Maersks and all of those. We don't have traditional ones? We don't have local
ones?
No,
we used to have the Black
Star Line.
And there was a reason why we had that. But, you know, obviously that's no longer the case. And now we are totally dependent upon multinational shipping lines. And overemphasis on ports has two advantages. First, to government. If you consider that, government's tax revenue, over 50% of government tax revenue is derived from the two ports.
So you're talking what, Tema, Takrady?
Tema and Takrady. Our tax revenue, mass of our tax revenue is derived from the two ports.
50%?
Over 50%.
Yearly?
Yearly, from the two ports. So we're heavily dependent on those ports. Who else benefits from the ports we have? Multinational shipping lines. Because the value chain, when ships come in, they discharge cargo, they load cargo. The agents of the shipping lines are not necessarily Ghanaian in the beneficial sense of the word. And so that entire transportation chain, the revenue derived from that doesn't stay here, it goes out. So as I've said, we are importing maritime services to the tune of $2.4 billion. And we're only generating about 4 million worth of maritime transport services. So we have a deficit of 1.9 billion that we are losing or we are throwing away. So if we could...
How can we plug that?
Well, a couple of things. We need to define the maritime value chain and understand that it goes beyond ports. All the services relating to the importation of cargo, transport services relating to the importation of cargo, including, for example, this is quite important, insurance, cargo insurance. When we import under trade terms called CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. So the person importing into Ghana pays cost of the goods, pays insurance of the goods, pays freight on the goods for the transportation of goods to a foreign entity. There are insurance companies here. If you think about it, your cargo is traveling into Ghana.
It should be insured
here. It should be insured
here
because if there's, what are you insuring against? You're insuring against the perils of the sea. You're insuring against short delivery. You're insuring against damage to the cargo when it arrives here. And when it does
arrive, maybe
even
piracy.
Piracy and all of that. Now, those are some of the perils of the sea. So when it does arrive here with problems that are covered by insurance, then your insurer is somewhere else out of this country. How do you make a claim? And so we are, basically sending that money when all of that insurance money can't stay in country. Because if we could insist or find a way of insisting that cargo insurance on our cargo remains here, we can claw back from that $1.9 billion to retain that value here. And also if we understand that, as I said, the maritime value chain, transport value chain, includes banking, includes legal services, includes logistics, it includes ship repair and maintenance, it includes warehousing, and so on and so forth. And the agency of the shipping lines, this matter of agents, freight forwarders now at loggerheads with shipping lines in terms of the cost of doing business. The matter is now in court. The freight forwarders have sued.
Indeed. And I spoke about that in the introduction to the conversation. They are talking about illegal fees. They are talking about delays, undue delays, and all of that. But just a quick question. Are the port charges fair?
Well, it's a commercial matter. It's a commercial matter. And there's a regulator. The regulator is Ghana Shippers Authority. It has the legal mandate to regulate shipping-related services in country. And so the law actually requires that when shipping service providers are determining fees, those fees should be made known to the authority, and those fees ought to be negotiated. In my own view, I think these are commercial matters. Not necessarily matters to be regulated strictly upon. But there is some framework, legal framework, allowing for these fees to be, if you like, negotiated in a sense. And this is historical. It stems from the, again, UNCTAD code of practice for liner conferences in the 1970s, where shipping lines were apparently engaging, monopolistic and antitrust-like behavior, and therefore the UN stepped in to protect least developing countries. And something came out of that in terms of how this should be conducted. And so there's a UN UN-sponsored treaty on this, and Ghana is a signatory to that. And that led, obviously, to the formation of the Shippers Council, which now transformed into the Ghana Shippers Authority. So essentially, the idea of the authority is a consumer protection, if you like, agency or regulator, and therefore they should and they are concerned about what kinds of charges, whether the charges are related to services provided and so on and so forth. But the history has been, if now the players in the market are going to court and the service providers are also running to court, then obviously there's something wrong with regulation, and something ought to be done there.
And these matters must be resolved quickly.
Must be resolved
for the industry to make some tracks. But when it comes to the Ghana Chamber of Shipping, what exactly is the purpose? Maybe tell us a bit about, just briefly, about the history, because I want us to get into other issues. And the purpose of its existence.
So the history of the Ghana Chamber of Shipping, I mean, Ghana Chamber of Shipping started in March 2018. It was, inaugurated in March 2018. The idea is that the shipping sector, or the Ghana's shipping sector, is dominated by public sector institutions and operatives. And government is heavily reliant on its agencies for advice and data and information and so on and so forth. And there was a gap between, public sector institutions advising on the maritime sector and actually acting as regulators and operators in the maritime sector and government policy. And so some very experienced players in the industry got together and said, we needed to have an independent voice on policy, on strategic policy direction of the sector. And that voice ought to be more like a think tank, capable of advising government, capable of disseminating information that is based upon data, and also capable of coordinating strategy. And so this is how the chamber came about.
Right.
And then also the chamber came about to actually give a voice to the private sector, which is private sector is not heavily present in the sector, and that is a problem. And when we talk about, we continue to have this conversation, I would explain to you why that is a problem. And so you had the likes of Mr. Beno Uzumensa, who together with Alhaji Asuma Banda, the latest Alhaji Asuma Banda, who recently passed, God bless his soul, and Alhaji was a life patron and co-founder of the chamber. And Alhaji is heavily, his impact on the industry is quite significant and heavy. So they, together with others like Alex Boabing, and you have HRT Ali, Captain Aaron Texan, who was the rector of the Maritime University. You had also Gordon Enim, also who was once a director of one of our ports. You had Honorable Niyama Shite, who was, I think, a minister of transport or related to the transport sector. Stephen Echampon, Mr. Robert Sinai. These got together and then started this chamber. And also importantly, you had others like somebody you will know, Dr. Kofi Mbia.
Oh.
Dr. Kofi Mbia was also a founder, and he's actually presently...
It's been a while since I...
Yes, he's actually presently the CEO of the chamber. And then you have Madam Jamila Mahama, who is also the vice president of the chamber presently. And so these are the if you like, the people, and all of these individuals have worked in the public sector as directors of state institutions that had regulatory control or some impact or influence over the maritime sector over the years. Mr. Beno Uzumensa was 8 years Director General of the Ghana Ports and Harbours Authority. Dr. Kofi Mbia could be arguably was one of the people who actually, created this whole architecture called the Ghana Maritime.
So with all these public sector people on there, you would expect some changes to happen. But what real changes in the immediate term can take place? Because we also have the African, continental free trade area.
Yeah.
Which we're supposed to benefit from.
Yes.
Some countries are benefiting more than others. Ghana, as some would say, has not really taken off. It's not really set sail on that agenda. In the maritime industry, how can we tap into that? Yes,
I think that, the single market, and the interesting thing is that, our coastline is relatively short.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's very little we can do as individual countries. The whole idea of the single market is integration and create a larger market. And alongside that thinking is also this thinking that in order for that larger market to be created, to boost intra-African trade and therefore economic empowerment and prosperity for Africa, then you need, underpinning that idea, a single maritime transport corridor, if you like. because without maritime transport, as I said, you can't actually do trade. Presently, intra-African trade is hovering around 16%. We want to take it to about 20, 25, 30%. And that's the only way we can feel the impact. Again, you talked about the global happenings, the geopolitical shifts, making it imperative that your production points are close to your consumption. So if you have to continue to go and bring goods from somewhere else far away in order to be able to consume and develop your countries, then you're going to be paying a lot of money, as we're already doing. And so there's the need to harmonize laws within every African country to create that single maritime transport corridor to allow for that impact on a single market to actually happen. Now, we have, in Ghana, we have the cabotage regime, which is a law that was passed not too long ago. Nigeria has a cabotage regime. All these cabotage laws are basically laws that are aimed at creating a local shipping sector. Because as I said, what we have is we are superintending over a shipping sector which is not actually fit for purpose. It's bringing in...
investors are tapping into it, benefiting more than we are.
Than we are. So we need to create a local shipping industry. And how do we do that? By harmonizing our laws across the continent, delineating a market, and de-risking it for private sector investment. As I said, we have a situation where the maritime sector, as regulation, and state actors, we need to get the private sector investment in there to build short sea vessels, because in shipping is all about vessels. We don't, actually on our register, apparently we have about 51 vessels. And those vessels are very old. I dare say that, you know, most of them would have to go to the scrap yard very soon. And so our contribution in terms of vessel ownership, mainly in fishing vessels and the like, is not impacting on our local economy. We are still relying heavily on road. And if you consider that maritime transport or shipping is the most efficient way of carrying goods from one place to the other, and even including passengers, is the most efficient way of doing it, then cost efficiency and so on and so forth, then it means that we need to find a way of actually building that sector, involving local participation in the value chain, and retaining much of that value, and therefore engendering production all across the continent.
Now, on that very point you make, in some 3 to 4 minutes, we have to conclude on this conversation. But I'd like to find out from you, you've mentioned some challenges you're facing.
Yeah.
You've mentioned why this does not fit into even our economic policies and programs. You've mentioned that 50% of tax revenue that we derive comes from both Tema and Takrady, those ports. What role can government play in sanitizing the system, so to speak? How can it work with private enterprise to ensure that we get the boons we require? I would like that to be your penultimate point.
Yeah, I think government should work fairly under the AFCFTA agenda to actually lead. The Secretariat is here.
Government should lead.
Yeah, should help lead this idea of creating what I refer to as the Continental African Maritime Corridor. When you do that, which is basically just harmonizing our laws across board to allow focus on short sea shipping, which means that, in fact, it has been, the UN has projected that by when the AFCFTA is fully implemented, the demand for maritime services and shipping would increase by almost get to about 62% of the current state in which it is. And so we'll be needing across Africa about 100 ships. Now, where are these ships going to be? We need ships in short sea, basically carrying goods from production centers or feedstock centers anywhere on the continent to manufacturing and production centers and to market. Presently, that is not being served by long-haul shipping. So short sea shipping, coastal shipping, government should also lead in terms of policy and incentives in opening up our inland waterways for maritime navigation. So transit cargo going up north, going through the landlocked countries and so on and so forth. This is something that ought to be done.
Right.
Otherwise, we'll continue to rely on road, which is not necessarily efficient and is very costly. And, really the low-hanging transport system that we can hang on to and use to help engender production is maritime transport. So that's what government should be.
As I take your final words, I just want a quick response.
Yeah.
Should taxes be reduced?
Taxes in the ports, yeah, they should be looked at. They should be seriously looked at and reduced, because if you think about it, we are heavily relying on the ports. Government doesn't have the incentive. There's really, because government tax revenue is coming from the ports, there's really not much incentive to doing that. But essentially, they're shooting themselves in the foot, because your ports are competing with Lome, they're competing with Ivory Coast, they're competing with others, Lagos, and so you have to make them competitive. Transit cargo has to go through here.
Are we competitive?
I dare say
Just
we are.
straightforward.
Yeah,
Are
I
we
dare say we are. But again, there's much more needing to be done. The cost of doing business in our ports is still extremely high, and then that needs to be looked at.
Mr. Aholu, we're grateful for your time this morning, and definitely you've teased certain crucial issues that we'll have to look at, not just from government but private enterprise, moving into the future and making ourselves competitive. Because if we continue relying on the other countries that have the large shipping, entities, we're always going to shoot ourselves in the foot. Exactly. And if there's any crisis and they decide they are no longer going to serve us, then where does that leave us? We'll be sitting ducks.
And besides, if something, if we are in a crisis, which has nothing to do with economics, but even war, we don't have ships.
And that's
it's a security.
It's a security issue. And that has been Stanley Aholu, Mr. Stanley Raja Koshi Aholu, President of the Ghana Chamber of Shipping. Of course, a lot of issues remain to be addressed, but some of them are being addressed by the courts, so we shall not wade into those. And he, of course, is President of the Ghana Chamber of Shipping. Thank you.
If I may, just one last one. On the 24th, we're doing the
24th of March?
Of March, there will be a memorial forum on Alhaji Zuma Banda by the Chamber.
Oh, I see.
And we're going to be talking extensively about the impact of his life on the maritime sector and talk about the maritime sector extensively. So it will be happening at the Marriott, to be covered live by Joy FM. And so it's a 2-hour event, and I'll be hoping that you yourself will be there and people will listen in, and we can discuss the maritime sector.
24th of March.
24th.
Which hotel again? Marriott?
Marriott.
Marriott. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for staying for this conversation about Ghana's maritime fortunes. Do stick and stay. When I return, I'll be sharing my blunt thoughts with you, and I've titled it The GFA and Our SOEs in Ghana, the crises on our hands. Just a crisis, no? At Dorso. I'll be right back.